The needle hit wrong. Kale Morrow saw it before anyone else did. His eyes caught the decimal point on the dosage order. 0.4 milligrams. Not 4.0. One number. One dot. The difference between saving a 7-year-old boy and stopping his heart cold. He stopped moving. Everything around him kept going. Monitors screaming, wheels grinding on linoleum, someone pulling curtain rings across a metal rod 2 bays down with that sound like a zipper being torn open. And Kale stood completely still in the middle of all of it and read the number again. 0.4. Not 4.0. His eyes moved to the 4 line. Then to the boy behind the curtain. Then back to the order screen. 3 seconds total. Then he moved. He reached across the medication cart, tapped the screen twice, pulled up the override request on his tablet and turned it toward the attending resident, a young woman named Dr. Camille Osei, whose eyes went wide the second she saw the number. Not wide with confusion, wide with the particular kind of recognition that arrives when you realize what almost happened. She corrected it without a word. The syringe went back. A new one came out. The boy's 4 lines stayed clean. No one announced what just happened. No one said the words, "You caught it." The machine kept beeping. The fluorescent lights kept pressing. Kale stepped back against the wall and made himself small again. That was the job. His job, specifically. He was the nurse the residents learned to read because he couldn't speak. He communicated through the tablet strapped to his forearm, through sign when anyone bothered to know it, through a look in his eyes that said more than most people said out loud. In 4 years at Mercy General, Kale Morrow had become invisible by necessity. He kept his head down. He kept his documentation perfect. He got on the number 7 bus at 6:47 every morning and got off at the stop 2 blocks from the hospital and walked in through the staff entrance where nobody ever stood around talking. He was good at this. He was very, very good at being unnoticed. The ER smelled the way it always smelled. Bleach and something underneath the bleach, something human that the bleach never fully won against. The fluorescent lights had a sound too, if you'd been in the building long enough to hear it. A low, continuous hum that sat just beneath the monitor beeps and the voice announcements and the wheels. Kale heard it every day. He'd stopped noticing it consciously, but his body still knew it was there. The way your body knows the sound of your own refrigerator running at night even when your mind has moved on to other things. He had settled back into the rhythm of the shift charting, checking, moving through the bay with the efficiency that had become his only visible language. When Chief Surgeon Draven Halricks walked through the ER doors and noticed him immediately, Draven had that kind of attention, the kind that felt like a searchlight, cold and sweeping and not interested in what it found, only in confirming that it could find anything it wanted. He was brilliant, everyone said so, and everyone was right. His surgical outcomes ranked in the top 2% nationally. He moved through the hospital like he owned the walls, and in some ways he did. His name was on 3 grant proposals currently under review. His reputation made donors sign checks, and the board treated his opinions like policy that hadn't been written down yet. He also had a temper that the hospital had decided was a quirk of genius rather than a problem that needed addressing. Nobody said that part out loud, but everyone understood it. He walked straight to the medication cart. His eyes went to the updated order, then to Kale. The look lasted exactly 1 second longer than it should have. Who changed this? His voice was the kind of quiet that was actually loud. The kind that didn't need volume because the room already knew to be afraid of it. Dr. Osei opened her mouth. Kale was already lifting his tablet. He typed. The original dosage was a decimal error. I flagged it. Dr. Osei made the correction. Draven looked at the screen, then at Kale. You flagged it, he repeated. Kale nodded. You. Draven's jaw moved. A nurse. Flagged an attendance order. Kale typed again. The patient is 7 years old. The original dose would have caused cardiac arrest. The boy behind the curtain, whose name was Marcus, whose mother was still out in the waiting room filling out insurance forms and pressing her thumbnail into her palm, the way people do when they are trying to hold themselves together. He did not know any of this. He was sedated and stable, and his small chest rose and fell in a rhythm that Cale had been watching for the last 40 minutes with the specific attention he reserved for patients who almost didn't make it. Draven set down the chart. And then he moved. It happened fast. The way things that shouldn't happen always happen. Not with build-up, not with warning, just a sudden fact inserted into the world without asking permission. Draven's hand closed around a fist of Cale's hair at the back of his skull. One yank. Sharp. Down and to the right. Cale's head snapped. His neck stretched. The tablet clattered against the cart edge. His scalp burned in a bright, specific line. Not spreading, not dull, but precise, like a wire pulled tight just under the surface of skin. He tasted copper at the back of his throat, clean and sudden, the kind of taste that arrives before your brain has had time to process what just happened to your body. The glove snapped when Draven released him. That sound. That small, flat, rubber snap. That was the sound Cale would hear for a long time afterward. Not the pain. Not the words. The snap. The sound of someone finishing something casual. The room was silent. Not hushed silent. The monitors still beeped, but they felt far away, like they were happening in a different building. Dr. Osei had gone still. The two residents near the window had gone still. The tech at the station had his eyes on his screen and was very deliberately not turning around. Everyone in the room had made the same choice in the same instant, to look at anything except the thing that had just happened. Draven straightened his coat. "Next time you want to question an order," he said, "you route it through proper channels. Not through your little screen." He walked out. No one moved for 3 full seconds. Then the machine beeped. Someone's shoes squeaked on linoleum. Dr. Osei looked at Cale and then looked away, which was worse than if she'd never looked at all. There was something in that look. Apology and calculation running alongside each other, and the calculation winning the way it almost always did in this building. Hi viewers. Have you ever worked somewhere that made you feel invisible no matter how hard you tried? Drop your experience in the comments. I want to hear it. Cale pressed his palm flat against the cart edge. The burn across his scalp was fading to a dull, low throb that he could work around. He breathed through his nose, counted to 4. Reached up and tucked his tablet back into its wrist strap with steady hands. He had to finish the shift. Marcus was stable but still needed monitoring. The woman behind curtain 3 had stopped crying, which sometimes meant things were getting better and sometimes meant the opposite, and someone needed to check. There were 4 more patients on the board and 2 more hours before his break, and the hospital did not stop because something had happened to him. He got back to work. But somewhere in the space between one task and the next, he became aware of something pressing at the edge of his attention. Not a sound. Not a movement. Just a weight. There was a window on the south wall of Bay 3. A viewing window, frosted glass on one side, clear from the other, a leftover from an older hospital layout when observation rooms were standard. No one used it as an observation point anymore. The room behind it was a storage corridor full of equipment carts and boxes of supplies that staff retrieved and forgot about in equal measure. Cale had worked in that bay for 4 years and had never once seen anyone standing at that window. Someone was standing at that window, not moving, not turning away. He couldn't make out features, just the shape of a man. Dark jacket, completely still. The frosted glass blurred everything above the shoulders, but the stillness was clear. And the direction, looking directly into the bay, looking directly at him. Cale turned back to his patient chart. His fingers didn't shake. He made very sure of that. But he felt it. The weight of being seen by someone who had chosen to keep watching. He couldn't explain why that felt more significant than what had just happened. Maybe because the pain was already fading and the watching was still happening. Maybe because he had spent 4 years perfecting the art of being overlooked, and something about this man behind the glass was refusing to cooperate with that arrangement. He finished the shift. He clocked out. He walked to the bus stop in the dark, his bag over one shoulder, the night air cold against his neck. He stood under the overhang and waited for the number 7 and did not look at his phone. The rain didn't fall that night, pressed against the windows like it was trying to get in. The coffee in the break room had been burning since 5 a.m. Cale could smell it from the hallway, That particular bitter that comes from heat applied too long, the kind that turns coffee into something closer to tar, something that stopped being a comfort a long time ago and became just a habit with a bad outcome. He poured a cup anyway, stood at the window, drank it black and too hot and let the burn travel down slow, because sometimes one burn was better than thinking about another one. His scalp still remembered. That was the thing about physical pain that nobody prepared you for, the way it left an imprint in the body's memory separate from your mind's. He could decide not to think about it. His mind could move on, redirect, focus on the shift ahead, on Marcus's chart, on the board, on anything. But the body didn't take direction that way. The body kept its own record. He could be standing perfectly still, doing nothing, and the skin at the back of his head would tighten and the copper taste would surface and he would be back in bay 3 for 1 second. Neck snapping right, card edge catching his tablet, room going quiet before he breathed it back down. He set the cup down. He was not going to spend the day inside that moment. He had made that decision on the bus ride home, sitting in the back with his bag in his lap, and he was keeping it. He pulled out his phone, opened the encrypted notes app, the one he'd downloaded 8 months ago, after the third incident, after it had become clear that what was happening was not a series of accidents but a pattern that needed a record. The interface was plain. White screens, black text, a passcode that wasn't his birthday or a word or anything with personal connection. Something he'd generated randomly and memorized the way you memorize something you need to survive. He opened a new entry. Date, time, location, Bay 3, main ER corridor. He typed fast and precise the way he always did when he was doing this. No emotion in the language, just the architecture of what happened. Physical contact initiated without consent. Hair seized at the posterior scalp. Force applied downward and lateral. Duration approximately 2 seconds. Witnessed by Dr. Camille Osei, 2 unnamed residents, 1 radiology tech at Station 4. He paused. His thumb hovered. And 1 individual at the south viewing window. Identity unknown. He stared at that line for a moment. Then he saved the entry, locked the app, put the phone away. The hallway outside the break room was filling up with morning shift change. Voices kept low and professional, the shuffle of clipboards and handoff notes, the squeak of wheels, the elevator chiming twice at the end of the hall. The hospital ran on rhythm and Cale ran with it. Rhythm was a kind of armor. Keep moving. Stay useful. Don't create a moment of stillness that someone else might decide to fill. Except, Draven had been finding those moments for months now. It started after September. After Cale had noticed the discrepancy in the sleep log documentation. Attending hours logged that didn't match the access records he'd seen by accident while pulling a chart, and flagged it in a shift handoff note. He hadn't filed anything formal. Hadn't gone to HR. Just noted it in the handoff the way you noted anything clinically relevant that someone on the next shift should be aware of. Somehow Draven had found out. And since then, the schedule had been quietly shifting. Longer stretches. Back-to-back trauma shifts with rest windows that technically met compliance requirements if you read the policy document with generous interpretation. The kind of thing that was hard to prove and easy to explain away and that Cale felt in his body by the end of every week like accumulated weight. He had documented that too. Every date, every shift change, every time the assignment board showed something that affected only him. Dr. Camille Osei came into the break room, poured coffee without looking at it, stood 3 feet from him in a silence that had the specific texture of an apology being held back. He understood her position. He did genuinely. She was 2 years from attending. Draven's recommendation carried real weight with the institutions that would decide her next 5 years. The math wasn't complicated. He nodded once when she finally looked at him. She nodded back. Then she left. The door swung and brought in a breath of antiseptic from the hallway and then swung shut again. Cale stood in the overlap of burnt coffee and bleach and breathed it in. He went back to work. 3 floors up, in a corner office that had been converted from a conference room, a man sat with a tablet displaying Mercy General's quarterly staffing reports. His name was not on the door. It didn't need to be. The office belonged, technically, to the philanthropic development arm of a foundation whose name also would not mean much to most people. Not because it wasn't significant, but because he had structured it deliberately to be unremarkable on paper. The kind of structure that took patience to trace back to its source. The kind of patience most people didn't have. He scrolled through the report. His finger stopped at a number. Nursing staff turnover. Pediatric adjacent units. 34% over 18 months. He held that number. 34%. In a unit where continuity of care was directly tied to patient outcomes. In a unit that he had invested in specifically because continuity of care was what made the difference between a child who recovered and a child who didn't. He tapped the number. Cross-referenced it against the exit interview archives. 80% of the interviews were marked incomplete. His jaw shifted. Not anger, not yet. Something more like the sensation of identifying a variable in a system that shouldn't be there. A number that sat wrong in an otherwise ordered structure. He made a single note. One word. Then he closed the report and opened the next one. Back in the ER, Cale was pulling a double. He hadn't asked for it. The schedule had appeared that way Monday morning, and he had looked at it for a long beat and then prepared his bag accordingly and said nothing. By hour 10, his hands were steady but his shoulders were not. There was a tension that lived in the upper back when you'd been standing and moving and staying alert for too long. Not pain exactly, just a kind of locked-in compression, like the body bracing against something that hadn't arrived yet. By hour 12, he was operating on precision alone. Pure function. The kind of focus that looks from the outside like calm and feels from the inside like a room with all the lights off and one small lamp in the corner working hard. He was charting at Station 4 when Dorinda Beckwith leaned over. Dorinda was the charge nurse. 61 years old. 22 years in this ER. She had seen enough things go wrong in this building to have developed a specific economy of movement and speech. She said what needed saying and nothing more, and when she moved it was always towards something that mattered. She said quietly, "You need to go home, Cale." He typed on his tablet. "I'm fine." "That wasn't a question," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. Then she reached up and signed, slowly and deliberately, each gesture careful. "Go home. Rest. Come back whole." He packed his bag. He was in the elevator, bag over his shoulder, tablet in hand, watching the floor numbers count down, when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Text message. No greeting. No context. No name. 7 words. "Do not delete your notes." The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened. Cale stood in the lobby with the fluorescent lights pressing everything flat above him and read those 7 words 4 more times. Not because he didn't understand them. Because he was taking inventory of what they meant about the situation he was in. Someone knew about the encrypted app. Someone knew he had been keeping records. And whoever it was, they weren't telling him to stop. He walked out into the night. The air was cold and the bus was on time and he sat in the back the whole ride home and looked at the 7 words on his phone screen until the bus reached his stop and the doors opened and he had to get up and go. Marcus opened his eyes on a Tuesday. Cale was in the middle of charting vitals when the boy's hand, small, brown, wrapped in a monitoring cuff, reached out from under the blanket and grabbed 2 of Cale's fingers. Just grabbed them. No warning. Cale went still. Marcus blinked up at the ceiling, the way people did when they'd been under long enough that the ceiling needed a moment to make sense again. Then he turned his head. He looked at Cale the way small children sometimes looked at adults they'd decided to trust. Without strategy, without self-consciousness, just direct and open and certain. "Are you the one who stayed?" he asked. Cale reached for his tablet with his free hand. Oriented it so Marcus could see the screen. "I was nearby," he typed. Marcus read it slowly, lips moving just a little. He nodded, like that confirmed something he'd already worked out on his own. He didn't let go of the fingers. Cale sat. He charted with his other hand. Marcus drifted in and out of the light sedation in cycles. Surfacing, checking, finding the fingers still there, going back under. Each time he surfaced, the check was the same. Quick. Sideways. Making sure. And each time the fingers were still there. It was such a small thing. It traveled through Cale like a sound he hadn't heard in a long time. Not heard with ears, the other kind of hearing. The kind that happens in the center of the chest when something reaches past all your practice distance and finds you anyway. He had become very good at staying useful, at being present in the technical sense, hands on the work, eyes on the chart, brain processing the next thing and the next thing. He had not realized how thoroughly he had learned to be absent in the other sense. Being chosen. Not for competence. Not for precision. Just chosen. The boy's hand finding his in the uncertain space of waking up and deciding. This one. He finished the chart. His handwriting was perfectly even. His internal state had nothing to do with his hands. That was a discipline built over years and it held. But his throat was doing something that discipline had less authority over, and he swallowed once, hard, and kept his eyes on the screen. Across the hospital, not 3 floors up but 4, not in the converted conference room but in the main administrative wing, in an office that had a window overlooking the east side parking structure and a landscape of gray afternoon sky. Rhett Vale was not reading financial reports. He was reading a name. Cale Morrow, pediatric ER nurse. 4 years at Mercy General. Performance reviews across every cycle. Exceptional. Commendations, 3 formal, documented. 1 informal commendation attached to a near-miss incident from 8 months prior, the paperwork for which had been reviewed, marked resolved, and filed in the archive where things went to stop being looked at. Rhett looked at the word resolved for a long time. He knew what resolved meant in institutional language. It didn't mean fixed. It meant acknowledged and set aside. It meant the box had been checked so that no one was obligated to open it again. He closed the file. He was a man who had built 2 companies before 32 using a specific ability, the capacity to look at any system, any organization, any set of people functioning together, and identify the thing being treated as normal that wasn't. Most people couldn't see it. It hid inside language, inside words like resolved and compliance and within policy. Inside numbers like 34% turnover that nobody was asking why about. He had seen it on the other side of the glass 3 weeks ago. He had been in the South Corridor during a pre-inspection walkthrough of the pediatric wing. He funded the wing. He made a point to walk every property he funded before any formal walkthrough happened, because formal walkthroughs showed him what people wanted him to see and he had long since stopped being interested in that. He walked alone, without announcing himself, with a floor plan and a flashlight and questions he was going to answer for himself. He'd been in the storage corridor behind the frosted observation glass when the ER bay beyond it had shifted. He had stood completely still. He had watched a nurse catch a dosage error that would have sent a 7-year-old boy into cardiac arrest. He had watched the same nurse get yanked by the hair in front of 6 witnesses. He had watched those 6 witnesses each make the same decision in the same instant to look elsewhere. To see nothing. To protect whatever they had to protect. He had not moved. He was not a man who made noise when silence was more effective. He had learned that in a life that had started with very little, with an apartment in a part of the city where silence was also a survival skill, where the difference between a person who made it and a person who didn't was often less about intelligence or effort and more about the ability to read a room correctly and act at exactly the right time instead of the first available time. He had stood in that corridor for a long time after the surgeon walked away. Then he had taken the elevator up, gone back to the office and sent 2 emails. One to his attorney. One to a forensic HR consultant named Malcolm Briggs who specialized in exactly this kind of situation, the kind that lived in the gap between what was documented and what was true. He did not contact the hospital board. Not yet. He pulled the staffing reports up again now. Then the incident documentation archives. Then the scheduling records for pediatric-adjacent nursing staff going back 14 months. He didn't work fast. He worked the way he always worked. Like every piece of data was in the right place somewhere, and it was just a matter of placing them in the right sequence until the shape they made together became visible. Took 2 hours. The shape was clear. His jaw tightened. He stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the parking structure and the access road and the gray afternoon above it. He had funded this wing because 6 years ago a child had died in a hospital that didn't have the resources that would have saved her. He had never told that story to a journalist or a donor or a board member. He had simply written the check, structured the donation, and made sure the wing existed. He was not the kind of man who turned grief into a press release. But he was exactly the kind of man who turned it into something that lasted. His phone rang. His attorney, Simone. "The audit request," he said before she finished saying his name. "I want it framed as routine compliance. Standard language. No flags visible on the initial filing." "Timeline?" Simone asked. "Start of next week." A pause. "And the scope?" "As broad as the standard template allows." He watched a bus pull away from the stop across the street. "I want it to feel like paperwork, Simone. Not like a decision." "Understood." He ended the call. He looked back at the window. The bus had disappeared at the corner. "I won't touch him," he thought. "I'll remove the ground he's standing on." The afternoon light came through gray and flat and said nothing back. He picked up the phone and made the second call. The audit started on a Wednesday and looked like nothing. 2 people from compliance came in with lanyards and laptops and the kind of professional neutrality that made hospital administrators offer them coffee and smile a little too long. They sat in the conference room on the 4th floor and requested documentation. Staffing records. Incident logs. Scheduling matrices going back 18 months. The request form said routine compliance review. It said it 3 times in 3 different sections, the way important things were sometimes repeated to make them look ordinary. By Thursday afternoon, HR had sent interview invitations to 11 staff members across 3 departments. The language was careful. Brief conversation as part of our ongoing quality initiative. No mention of specifics. The kind of invitation that arrived in your inbox and sat there with low urgency and high implication. Dr. Camille Osei received one. The 2 residents from Bay 3 received one each. Dorinda Beckwith received one. Cale Morrow did not receive one. Not yet. Draven Helricks received none. The absence of a name could say more than any list. Draven noticed. He was not a man who missed the shape of a situation. His entire career was built on reading systems, the human body and everything else. He had survived 17 years in surgical medicine partly through skill and partly through a specific kind of institutional intelligence, the ability to feel pressure before it announced itself. He could tell when a room was reconfiguring around him even when no one had said a word. Something was reconfiguring. He didn't know the source yet, but he knew the feeling. By Friday, the sharpness that lived in him was closer to the surface. And it came out the way it always came out, downward. Toward the people in the building with the least structural protection. Cale was at Station 2, charting the overnight board, when Draven came in from a 12-hour surgical block and walked directly to where he was standing. He didn't look at the board. He looked at Cale. "Morrow." His voice was flat, professional, the kind that couldn't be recorded and called threatening because it contained no obvious threat. "Just wait. Just the expectation of compliance. The Peterson chart. Walk me through the overnight vitals." Cale pulled up the chart, turned the tablet toward him. Draven didn't look at it. "Out loud," he said. The temperature of the room changed. Not the actual temperature, the other kind. The kind you feel across your skin when a space full of people suddenly stops moving at the same pace. Cale held the tablet steady. He typed, "I communicate through the tablet. The chart is complete and available for your review. I'm asking you to walk me through it." The overnight vitals are documented in detail on page 2. BP stable. O2 sat 97. No events recorded. Draven looked at the tablet. Then at Cale. Then at the room, at the 2 residents who had found something urgent to look at on their own screens, at the tech at station 4 who had his back turned at just the right angle, at Dorinda Beckwith standing 6 feet away who had not moved and was not going to move. "You know," Draven said, in that same flat professional register, "there's a question I've been meaning to raise with administration, about whether the ER is structured to accommodate staff with significant communication limitations in high-acuity situations." He picked up the paper chart beside the tablet, flipped it open, didn't look at it. "It's really a patient safety question. I'd hate for anyone to be placed in a position that wasn't appropriate for their abilities." He set the chart down. "For their sake." He walked away. The room released. The collective breath that hadn't been drawn came back in. Dorinda was beside Cale before Draven had turned the corner. She signed fast and low, "Document it. Word for word." He nodded once. He pulled up the Notes app, typed the time, the location, the language as close to exact as he could reconstruct it. Significant communication limitations. High acuity situations. Patient safety question. All of it placed inside quotation marks in the record, each word sitting exactly where it had been said. His hands did not shake. He saved the entry, locked the app, went back to the Peterson chart. The shift continued the way shifts continued. The board filled, the board emptied, the board filled again. The fluorescent lights pressed everything flat. By hour 8, the ER had its own gravity, its own internal weather, and Cale moved through it the way he always moved through it, by making himself precisely useful and precisely small. At 9:14 p.m., a message appeared in his work email. It was from the hospital's administrative office. Brief, professional, requesting a meeting with someone named Dr. Retvale regarding a patient advocacy matter related to the pediatric unit. Hargrove Suite, 4th floor, at his earliest availability. Cale read it twice, then opened a browser, typed the name. The results came back. He read the first paragraph of the first result, then the second paragraph. Then he closed the browser and sat with the tablet in his lap for a moment that was longer than it looked from the outside. The man at the window, the 7 words. And now this. He opened a reply window, typed slowly, "I'm available Monday at 7 a.m. before my shift begins." He pressed send. Then he sat with his hands in his lap and thought about what it meant to walk into a room carrying everything he had been quietly carrying for 14 months. Whether he could do it. Whether the person waiting in that room was the kind who would know what to do with it. Whether that was even the right question. Monday was 3 days away. He picked up the tablet and went back to work. The Hargrove Suite was on the 4th floor, down a hallway that turned twice and ended at a door that looked like every other door in the building except for one thing. The light around its edges was warmer. Cale noticed that on the walk toward it, the fluorescent hum that governed the rest of the hallway gave way, just at the edges of that door frame, to something quieter and more amber. It was a small thing. He noticed it anyway, the way he noticed all the small things. Because in a building where everything was designed to look the same and mean the same and keep everyone moving at the same pace, small differences were the only reliable information. He knocked at 7:01 a.m. "Come in." The office was not what he had allowed himself to imagine. He had tried not to imagine it, but the mind does what it does in the quiet parts of a night shift, filling the unknown spaces with shapes drawn from experience. He had half-expected glass and steel and the kind of deliberate expensiveness that was meant to establish something about who sat on which side of the desk. This room was warm, not performed warmth, not design magazine warmth. Just a lamp in the corner casting a low amber circle, with tones on the desk and shelves. A window with actual fabric curtains instead of horizontal blinds. The chair across from the desk was not smaller than the chair behind it. That detail, too, was noted. The man standing when Cale entered was tall, dark skin, a jaw that looked like it had been set firmly against something at some point and never fully returned to neutral. He wore a dark jacket, no tie, sleeves rolled once at the cuff. Not casually, more like the role of someone who had already been working for an hour, and this was just where the sleeves were now. "Mr. Morrow." His voice was even, not warm and not cold, present. "Thank you for coming in early." He gestured toward the chair. Not a command, an offering. Cale sat. He set his tablet on the edge of the desk, oriented at an angle so the screen faced both of them equally. He had done this 10,000 times in 4 years, the setup, the positioning, the silent establishment of the terms of communication. He watched Rhett Vale take it in, register it, and then simply proceed without commenting on it, without adjusting his behavior in a way that made Cale's communication method the subject of the conversation. That was noted, more than almost anything else in the first 2 minutes. Rhett sat. He didn't open a file or reach for a laptop. He folded his hands on the desk and looked at Cale directly, in a way that was not performance and not challenge. It was just attention, the clean, sustained kind. "I'll be straightforward with you," he said. I was in the South Corridor 3 weeks ago. The storage room behind the viewing window in Bay 3. Pause. I saw what happened. Cale's hands rested on the tablet. He didn't type anything yet. He held the information where it had landed and let it sit there. I'm not here to tell you what to do with that, Rhett continued. I'm not here to make you a promise or ask for your trust. I prefer data. He tilted his head slightly. I'd like to understand what you've experienced here over time, not just that one incident. Cale looked at the tablet screen, then at Rhett. He typed one word, why? Rhett looked at the word, then back at him. Because a pattern that shows up in one moment doesn't start in that moment. And I make better decisions when I understand the whole shape of something, not just the part one happened to see. What kind of decisions? The kind that affect how this hospital functions, who it protects, how long that continues. The pause that followed was not uncomfortable. It had substance in it, the weight of two people deciding simultaneously how honest to be. Cale reached into the inner pocket of his bag. He pulled out a folded printout, set it on the desk surface precisely parallel to the edge. Then a second one, then a third. Rhett did not reach for them right away. He watched Cale's hands first. The precision of them, the way each page was placed with the same alignment. Not because someone was watching, but because alignment was simply how Cale's hands worked. The reflex of someone who had spent years making every small controllable thing as correct as possible because the larger things were not in his control. Then Rhett picked up the first sheet. He read. Actually read, not scanning the way people scanned when they wanted to appear thorough. Moving through each line, holding it, moving to the next. Cale watched him read, which was something he did not usually allow himself to do. Watch people process the record he had been keeping in the dark for over a year. He had not shown these pages to anyone. Not Dorinda, who had been his most consistent ally in this building. Not Dr. Osei, who knew enough and carried the weight of knowing quietly. Not the unknown number who had sent him 7 words in an elevator that still lived in his saved messages. He had printed these pages at 2 a.m. in the hospital library, listening for footsteps between each page coming off the printer, and folded them into his bag before he'd let himself decide if he was actually going to use them. He had told himself he didn't know why he was bringing them. The lie had served its purpose long enough to get him here. He had brought them because the man at the south window had not looked away. Rhett finished the 3rd page. He set it down with the same alignment Cale had used, the sheets stacked parallel to the desk edge. He didn't seem to notice he'd done it. He looked at the timestamps at the top of each entry first. These go back 14 months, he said. Cale nodded. The scheduling changes start in September. The incident in the hallway in October, the one marked no formal witnesses. Rhett's voice stayed even. The 4 staff exits from your unit in Q3. 2 personal reasons, 1 relocation, 1 listed as career advancement. He looked up. Did any of those 4 people speak with you before they left? 2 of them. What did they say? That they couldn't stay. That they were tired. That nothing would change. Rhett was quiet. He let those words have the space they deserved, which was more space than most people gave them. Cale's hands were in his lap now, the tablet on the desk surface between them. He could feel the specific quality of the silence in this room, not like ER silence, which was always the silence between sounds and always about to end. This silence was being maintained deliberately, being chosen. It had the same quality as the precise stacking of the pages, the even voice, the chair that wasn't smaller. He noticed, without intending to, that his hands were not entirely still. A small tremor. Left hand, ring and middle fingers. He had noticed it more over the past 3 months, the way the body registered things the mind had finished processing, or thought it had. Rhett noticed. Cale watched him notice. Rhett did not look at the hands and then look away in the particular way people had, the glance that was meant to be discreet and was actually just staring at slower speed. He simply looked at Cale's face and said, "Is there anything you haven't written down that you still remember clearly?" Cale thought about that. He typed, "The first time. 11 months ago. He told me my communication method was inefficient, that it slowed the team and created liability. There were no witnesses present. I didn't document it at the time because, he paused, the cursor sitting there, because I thought maybe he was right. He hit the button that sent the text to the visible side of the screen. Rhett looked at the last sentence for a long moment. Long enough that Cale tracked it. He wasn't, Rhett said. Not with force. Not with the particular warmth that would have made it feel like a performance of reassurance. Just stated, the way you stated something that was factually accurate and didn't need volume or decoration to be true. Cale looked at the curtains, the window, the lamp in the corner. He looked back at Rhett. He typed, "What happens now?" "Now," Rhett said. "I go back to work." He began to align the 3 pages together, stacking them with care. He looked at Cale before he moved them. Cale nodded. His permission. Rhett set the printouts in the center drawer of the desk. Closed it with a quiet click. The meeting had taken 34 minutes. Cale's shift began in 22. He stood, picked up his bag, reached for the tablet. "Mr. Morrow." He paused. Rhett's expression had not changed. It was still even, still contained. But something in it had shifted by the width of a millimeter. A door still closed that had moved just slightly on its hinges. "You caught a dosage error that would have stopped a child's heart. That child is going home next week." He held Cale's gaze with the same quality of attention he'd held it with since the beginning of this meeting. "You should know that." Cale stood at the door with his bag strap in his hand and the amber lamp pressing its warm circle against the corner of the room and the tablet cool against his palm. He typed one word. "Okay." He walked out. The hallway was fluorescent, flat. The hum was back. He stood in it for one full second, orienting the way you oriented after stepping from one temperature into another. Behind the closed door, he heard Rhett's chair shift. A low sound, the desk drawer opening. Then the sound of a phone being picked up. The first thing Rhett said to whoever answered was not hello. It was a number, a share price, then a pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. And then, very quietly, a single instruction that moved through the closed door and found Cale in the hallway like a current running just below a still surface. Buy them all. The funding freeze hit on a Thursday morning, and nobody announced it. That was the thing about this kind of move, it didn't come with a voice. It didn't arrive in a meeting or a confrontation or any moment that could be pointed to and called what it was. It appeared inside a document that most people skimmed. A line in the weekly budget update, sitting between 2 other lines that nobody was going to flag. Pediatric wing supplemental allocation. Pending administrative review. 8 words. No explanation. No timeline. No signature. Cale found it because he read everything. He read everything because reading everything was the only form of surveillance available to someone with no formal authority in this building. You learned to watch the edges of things. The footnotes. The items in the digest that weren't meant to be important enough to read carefully. He was in the break room with his phone, running through the weekly digest the same way he ran through it every Thursday before his shift, when the line stopped him. He read it twice. Then he pulled up the full budget document and found the reference account number and cross-checked it against the pediatric wing codes. Codes he had memorized months ago because Dorinda Beckwith had once told him that knowing where a hospital's money came from told you more about what a place actually valued than any mission statement they'd ever frame on a wall. The supplemental allocation. That was the fund that covered the equipment upgrades already approved for the spring. The additional nursing hours that kept the unit properly staffed through the winter census spike. The night coverage that separated a ward running safely from a ward running by its fingernails after midnight. Pending administrative review. The words sat in his chest like something cold. 6 days ago he had sat in a warm office on the 4th floor and handed 3 printouts to a man who had looked at them with the full weight of his attention. He had walked back into the fluorescent light of the hallway afterward and heard something through a closed door. And now the funding that kept the pediatric wing functioning. The wing that housed Marcus, who was still there, who was supposed to go home next week, whose mother came every afternoon with a clean bag and eyes that had started to look less afraid, was frozen. He sat with the possibility that he had caused this. Not directly. He understood leverage well enough to know how it worked from both directions. You pushed in one place and pressure appeared somewhere else. Somewhere that was harder to connect back to the original push. Somewhere that made the person being targeted feel responsible for the damage surrounding them. You made the situation complicated enough that the person at the center of it started accounting for damage that wasn't theirs. Took the focus off the source and redirected it inward. He knew that was what this was. Knowing didn't make the cold feeling go anywhere. He set the phone down. Looked out the window at the parking lot going gray in the early morning. He had no direct line to Rhett. No number, no email. Nothing had been offered after the Hargrove meeting, and he hadn't thought to ask because that day he had been occupied entirely with the decision of whether to trust at all, and logistics had felt secondary. He went to work. He kept his face arranged, kept his hands useful. The shift demanded everything, and he gave everything because that was the deal he had made with himself when he was 23 and starting in this building. The patients got all of it. Whatever was happening to him was his to carry and theirs to benefit from. That line had never moved, but the weight of the building felt different today. He could feel it in the small things. The way the residents at Station 3 moved slightly slower. The way Dorinda, who moved through the CR like a system of fixed points, always certain, always directed, had a tightness around her mouth today that said she knew something and was deciding not to carry it loudly. At 3 p.m., Draven walked through the pediatric corridor. Not for rounds. Not for any scheduled visit. He moved at a measured pace, hands in his coat pockets, looking at the unit the way someone looked at a property they were assessing. He walked the full length of the corridor. Turned at the end. Came back. Said nothing to anyone he passed. He stopped at the nurse's station. Kale was there. Draven looked at the board. Then at Kale. His voice was the same as it always was. Flat, professional, carrying nothing that could be objected to in a recording. You're off the prime rotation starting Monday. Administrative rebalancing. Then he walked away. Kale stood at the station with the full understanding arriving in layers. Not fired. Not confronted. Just moved. Quietly. The way you took apart something by removing what held it up, piece by piece, until the structure fell under the weight of what was missing. He pulled out his phone. He opened the Notes app, typed the time, the exact words, the witness count 0 and the framing, administrative rebalancing. 2 words designed to mean nothing while meaning everything. He saved the entry, locked the app, and then he did something he had not allowed himself to do in 14 months of keeping records. He sat down in the break room, alone, without a task in his hands, and let himself stay there for 4 full minutes. Not falling apart. Not anything dramatic. Just sitting with the weight of it. Without converting it immediately into something productive. Just being a man who was tired of carrying something heavy by himself and who was, for 4 minutes, not going to pretend that was fine. When he stood back up, his hands were still. His face was arranged. He went back to the floor and gave the rest of the shift what it was owed. He did not know while he was working that 3 floors up Rhett Vale was on the phone with the hospital's chief compliance officer. A man whose professional relationship with Draven Halrix had appeared in 3 vendor approval records over the past 2 years. Records that had surfaced in the forensic audit the way significant things always surfaced. Quietly late when most people had already stopped looking for more. The call lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, Rhett made a single notation in the margin of the open document on his desk. 1 word. Compromised. He made 2 more calls that afternoon. The chief compliance officer was removed by end of business Friday. The pediatric wing funding freeze was reversed by 9 a.m. Monday. Kale would not learn either of these things until after the weekend. What he knew, at the end of Friday's shift, was that Draven found him alone at the medication storage room door at 5:47 p.m. and stood 1 foot closer than the conversation required. You won't survive this hospital without me, Draven said. Quiet. Delivered with the flat confidence of a man who had confused being feared with being necessary for so long that he could no longer locate the difference. Kale looked at him. He did not reach for his tablet. He held the look for 3 full seconds. Then he picked up his bag. Walked to the elevator. Did not look back. The doors closed. He exhaled. His hands, just for that one moment in the privacy of the metal box, were not still. Rhett came to the ER on a Tuesday night and he brought coffee. Not the break room kind. Not the machine at the end of the east corridor that dispensed something brown and hot that qualified as coffee only by the loosest available definition. The kind in a paper cup with a lid and a sleeve, from the place 3 blocks east that Cale passed every morning on the walk from the bus stop and had never gone into because it cost $4 more than the cart outside the staff entrance. He set it on the counter beside Cale without announcement. Cale looked at the cup, at the sleeve, at the logo, then at Rhett. Rhett pulled up the rolling stool near Station 3. The one with one wheel shorter than the others, the one that listed left, the one nobody chose on purpose, and sat on it without seeming to notice or care about the list. He had his own cup. Same kind. He had brought 2. "How's the unit tonight?" he asked. "Quiet." 3 admits. "No trauma." "Good." He picked up his cup. They sat. The ER did its Tuesday night thing around them. A monitor in Bay 2 held a low, steady tone. Cart wheels on the far corridor, that particular squeak. The fluorescent lights pressed everything flat, except that the small desk lamp at the corner of Station 3 had been turned on at some point during the shift. Cale didn't know by who or when, and the 2 kinds of light met somewhere in the middle of the room and made something that was neither harsh nor soft. Just actual. Rhett said, "The funding freeze was reversed this morning." Cale looked up. Supplemental allocation reinstated. Full scope. Staffing hours, equipment budget, night coverage. He held his cup. "Your rotation change has been reversed too. You'll see the updated schedule tomorrow." Cale set his coffee down. "When I found the freeze in the digest, I thought I caused it." Rhett looked at that line. "You didn't." "Couldn't tell. That was the point, wasn't it?" "Yes." He said it without decoration. Make the surrounding situation complicated enough that the person being targeted starts accounting for damage that isn't theirs. Takes the focus off the source and puts it somewhere it doesn't belong. Cale absorbed that. It sat inside him the way true things sat. Not comfortably, but solidly. Like furniture placed where it belonged even if the placing had been difficult. He typed, "What did you do to the compliance officer?" Rhett looked at him. "Removed him. On what grounds?" His documentation across 3 vendor approvals was inconsistent with the audit evidence. "That is grounds." His voice stayed even. "I don't manufacture reasons. I find the real ones and I use them." Pause. "You move fast when you're ready. I move when I have enough. You gave me enough in the first meeting." He held his cup in both hands. "And everything you sent after." He looked at the room. At the board. At the lamp in the corner. Then back at Cale with something in the looking that was different than it had been in the Hargrove suite or the conference room. Less managed in it. More direct. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Cale nodded. "Do you ever get tired of being precise all the time?" The question landed differently than expected. Not a test. Not something to find the correct answer to. Just real. Delivered from a real place, in a voice that required an honest response or nothing. "Yes." Rhett nodded. The nod of someone who had expected that and also understood what it cost to say. "I used to work nights," he said. "Different city. I was 18. Building maintenance. Office tower downtown." He looked toward the window at the far end of the bay. "You move through a building like that at 2 a.m. and it looks completely different than it does during the day. Like you're seeing what the structure actually is when nobody's inside it performing. The bones of it." He was looking at the window but not lost in it. Still present. Just letting the memory exist alongside everything else. "I was invisible in those buildings," he said. "Not because I couldn't speak. Because nobody looked. But I looked." He turned back to Cale. "You learn, in those positions, that seeing is the one thing that doesn't require anyone's permission." Cale had gone still. "That's why you were walking the corridor. Without the formal walkthrough." The inspection wasn't scheduled until the following week. He held his cup. "I don't take formal walkthroughs I haven't initiated. Too many people know what to arrange before one arrives." "You went looking." "Yes." Cale looked at the counter. At the 2 cups sitting beside each other, same cups, same place. From a man who had noticed where he walked every morning. He typed slowly, "You grew up without much." Rhett held that question for a moment. Yes, so did I. The room was quiet between them. Not the loaded kind. The kind that had been earned by two people saying something true at the same time and letting it stand without filling the space afterward. After a moment, Rhett stood, set his empty cup in the waste bin at an angle that kept it from tipping. He adjusted his jacket lapel, a reflex, hands finding something to do. Then he looked at Cale's left hand on the counter. The hand with the tremor, ring and middle fingers. The one Cale had been managing quietly and worrying about for 3 months without saying anything to anyone. "May I?" Rhett said. He did not reach. He asked. And he waited. Cale looked at the hand. Then at Rhett. He nodded. Rhett put 2 fingers lightly at Cale's wrist. Not a grip. A check. For seconds, maybe 5. Unhurried. Tracking the rhythm. Then he let go, easy and complete. "Stress response," he said. "Not damage. In case that was somewhere in the back of your mind." It had been in the back of his mind for 3 months. "Thank you. I have a board meeting Thursday. Things will move after that." He picked up his jacket fully, moved toward the door, stopped at the edge of the bay and turned back. "That coffee cost $4 more than the cart outside." He said it simply. "A fact. I noticed you always pass the place on your way in." He left. Cale stood at the counter with his hand flat on the surface and the paper cup still warm beside it, and something expanding slowly in his chest the way a window opened in a room that had been shut too long. He stood there, in the empty section of the ER, with the listing stool still turned slightly left and the lamp still on at Station 3. Cale Morrow laughed. Not loudly, not performed, just the real kind. Short, almost surprised, rising up before he could think about whether it was appropriate. Gone almost before it arrived. But real. He looked at the door. He thought, "Don't go yet." The thought came before he could edit it. He looked at his coffee. He drank it. The board meeting was at 9 a.m. on Thursday, and by 8:45, everyone who had been paying attention knew something was happening. Not because of any announcement. Because of how people moved. The compliance consultants, lanyards, laptops, professional neutrality, arrived at 8:30 and went directly to the 4th floor without stopping anywhere. 3 board members Cale had never seen in the building arrived through the main entrance in sequence, each one met immediately by a liaison who walked with them at pace. Dr. Anastasia Rubin, chief of medicine, crossed the lobby at 8:42 with her badge already out and the look of someone who had made a decision before breakfast and was walking toward its consequences now. Cale saw all of it on his way from the staff entrance to the locker room to the floor. He filed it. He went to work. He did not know exactly what would happen in that meeting. He knew what he had contributed to it. 12 days ago he had set 3 printouts on a desk. He had added 2 more pages since the hallway threat, the rotation removal, and sent them through the secure file link Rhett's attorney had quietly provided, through the same number that had once texted him 7 words in an elevator. He knew the shape of the record he had built, document by document, month by month, entry by time-stamped entry. He did not know what that record became in a room he wasn't in. He knew what it had cost to build it. He checked Marcus first. The boy was sitting up, eating cereal from a plastic bowl, watching something on a tablet propped against his knee, and he gave Cale the solemn nod of a person who had been in a hospital long enough to develop his own professional manner. Cale nodded back with equal gravity, checked the vitals readout, updated the chart, kept moving. At 10:15, Dorinda came to stand beside him at Station 2. She was quiet for a moment. "HR is pulling sleep logs," she said. "Not just scheduling records. The self-reported ones. Going back 2 years. Cale looked at her. "And they're comparing them," she said, "to the or access records. The falsified logs. The discrepancy Cale had noticed 8 months ago in a shift handoff. The thing he had flagged and been punished for flagging. The thing that had started the long, slow targeting that followed. That discrepancy was now being placed next to documented reality in a room full of people whose professional mandate was to understand what the gap between the two meant, for patient safety, for the hospital's liability, and for a man who had used his reputation like a wall for 17 years. Who requested the comparison? The audit team. with direction from the major stakeholder representative. Kale went back to the chart he was charting. At 11:30, written statement requests went out to 6 nursing staff through official HR channels. Clean language. Formal process. Kale was on the list. He took the elevator to the small conference room adjacent to HR, sat down with his tablet and a printed template and spent 45 minutes building the most deliberate document of his life. Every entry from the encrypted app, reconstructed and formatted. Every timestamp, every word choice, every detail that had been precise because he had known, month by month, that precision was the only currency this process would eventually accept. He submitted it. He went back to the floor. At 2:18 p.m., Draven appeared in the ER. Not for any clinical reason. He was moving the way people moved when they had received information they had not been ready for. Fast, slightly off his usual center, the familiar command in his bearing replaced by something that looked more like motion used as a substitute for it. He came to the nursing station. He looked at the room, at Dorinda, at the residents, Kale, and then, for the first time in 4 years, he sat down. On the stool at the station, pulled up a chart on the desk screen, stared at it, did not speak. Nobody spoke. The monitors ran their rhythms. The building kept its pace. And the chief surgeon of Mercy General sat at the nurse's station in the middle of a Thursday afternoon like a man who had walked into a room expecting the furniture to be where it had always been and found it moved, and who had not yet decided what to do about the fact that he was the only one who hadn't known it was going to move. At 3:45, Kale's work email received a 3-sentence message. His presence was requested in the third-floor conference room at 4 p.m. He arrived at 3:58. Rhett was there. His attorney Simone, 2 board members, Gerard Ashby, who ran the meeting, and Renata Flood, who was quiet and precise and wrote everything in longhand in a leather notebook. Longhand, every word. HR Director Constance Webb, who had worked at Mercy General for 16 years and who looked at Kale when he came in with the kind of look you gave someone when you had spent several hours reading their words and finally understood what the writing of them had cost. Rhett looked at Kale when he entered. A single nod. Not warm and not cold. Present. I see you here. We're in this together. Keep going. Kale set his tablet on the table. I'm willing, he typed before anyone asked. The questions took 40 minutes. Careful, specific, each one building on the previous, the way questions built when someone had done the preparation to make every single one matter. Gerard Ashby asked most of them. Constance Webb asked 2. Rhett asked none. He sat at the end of the table with his hands folded and watched, and every time a question arrived that carried weight in it, he waited for Kale's full-typed response before the room moved on, which meant the room waited, every time, without being asked to. At the end, Gerard Ashby looked at Renata Flood. She met his eyes. She nodded once. He turned to Kale. The board votes for immediate suspension of Dr. Halrich's surgical privileges, pending the outcome of the full investigation. He paused. Effective at close of business today. Kale sat with that sentence. He had thought about this moment in the abstract more than once, in the way you thought about a destination when you were still very far from it. He had imagined there would be volume in it. Something that arrived like a wave. What arrived was a door swinging open quietly in an empty room. Real. Factual. He exhaled, slow and complete, and looked at his hands on the table. As people were gathering to leave, Gerard and Renata already in the hallway, Simone collecting papers, he heard Constance Webb say quietly to Rhett, behind him, Dr. Halrichs has requested a meeting with the board before any announcement goes public. He thinks it gives him an opportunity. A pause. Rhett, let him have it. Then, a beat later, Constance. He seems confident. And Rhett, very still, very quiet. I know. Kale walked out into the hallway. Stood there. The way Rhett had said those 2 words. Not as a concession. Not as worry. As someone who had already moved 3 steps past the position the other person believed they were standing in. He started toward the elevator. He stopped. He went back. Pushed the conference room door open. Rhett was alone. Standing at the window. Kale typed fast. Held up the screen. He smiled when he left. In the lobby, I saw it through the glass on his way out. Rhett read it. His jaw was set. His eyes were very still. He looked at Cale. I know, he said. Not surprise. Not concern. The sound of a man who had already accounted for it. Cale left the room, took the elevator down, stood in the metal box between floors. One of them had already lost. He just didn't know the full shape of it yet. Draven Helrix was removed from his position on a Friday afternoon. No confrontation, no gathering, no moment where anyone stood as a witness to it directly. Just a press release, 2 paragraphs, distributed internally at 4:30 p.m. Before it went to the public communications team, Mercy General Medical Center is pleased to announce a restructuring of senior surgical leadership to better align with our commitment to patient-centered care and staff excellence. Dr. Helrix will be transitioning out of his chief surgeon role effective immediately. The board thanks him for his service. Patient-centered care and staff excellence. 14 months of documentation. A decimal point. A glove snap. 7 words in an elevator. 3 printouts set on a desk in a warm office. A written statement submitted in a room where people finally wrote things down on the other side. 2 paragraphs. Cale read the release on his phone in the break room on his lunch break the following Monday. He had been off Friday and had stayed off. He'd gone home, changed out of his scrubs, made food, and slept 9 hours, which was more than he could remember sleeping in a single stretch in a long time. He read the release twice. Set the phone down. He did not celebrate. He hadn't expected to. The feeling wasn't triumphant. It wasn't the release he had imagined in the abstract, back when he was still imagining that such a thing might be possible. It was quieter than that and more real than that, the sensation of weight that had been placed on the back of your neck so slowly and gradually that you had stopped registering it as weight, and that was now simply gone. You didn't cheer when that happened. You just breathed differently. You stood a fraction taller without deciding to. He breathed. The break room smelled like the same burnt coffee it had always smelled like. The fluorescent lights pressed. The linoleum was the same color it had been yesterday. Everything looked exactly the same. It was completely different. He went back to the floor and the floor received him and kept moving, because hospitals did not pause for the resolution of anything. The board in Bay 2 ran its steady rhythm. Down the hall in the pediatric wing, Marcus's mother arrived at 10 a.m. with a bag of clean clothes and a look on her face that was almost too full to hold, and when Marcus saw her he went from careful and watchful, the particular stillness of a child who had been sick long enough to develop patience, to just a 7-year-old kid who hadn't been near his mom in too many days. And Cale stood at the doorway and watched it happen and then stepped back and gave them the room. Some things were not meant to have a witness. The day moved through its phases. Patients moved. The board filled and cleared. Residents who had spent months with their shoulders slightly up, slightly braced for something they could never name, began to move with a fraction less effort in their posture. Not dramatically. Just a degree of ease returning to the building the way warmth returned to a room after the source of cold had been addressed. You could feel it. You couldn't have put it in a chart. But it was real. Dorinda came to stand beside him at the station in the mid-afternoon. She signed. "How are you holding up?" He thought about that, actually thought, instead of generating the automatic response he had deployed for 4 years when anyone asked something like that. He typed, "I don't know the full answer yet. I think I need some time to find out." She looked at that for a moment. Then she signed, "That's honest." And she moved on because Dorinda understood that care was sometimes the act of giving someone space to arrive at their own answers without an audience watching them do it. He took the number 7 bus home, sat in the back, watched the city out the window. Streetlights coming on at the corners, the particular quality of late afternoon light before it tipped into evening. A woman walking fast with earbuds in and her bag on both shoulders like she had somewhere specific to be and had full confidence she was going to get there. He thought about Rhett's text. It had arrived at 2:14 p.m. from a number he hadn't had before. Not the 7-word number. A new one. Dinner. Not for business. Let me know if you're ready. 3 minutes later. No pressure on the timeline. He had read both messages 4 times. He knew what he wanted to say. Had known since the second read. But the word he wanted to send was yes, and the size of it, the real size of it, not the size of a text reply, but the size of what yes meant after this long and this much, felt like something that deserved a moment of being held before being released. He rode to his stop. He walked home. The sky was clear and dark after an earlier rain, the air precise and cold, the city showing more of itself than usual through the washed atmosphere. He stood at the door of his building. He typed his reply, Saturday, 7 p.m. I'll be ready. He pressed send. He stood there one more second. Then he went inside. The restaurant was not the kind of place people went to be seen. No open front. No street-facing glass. No tables arranged to catch the light from outside. Just a green door on a side street with a single lamp above it, casting light straight down instead of outward. Inside warm, low sound from somewhere soft and stringed. A room built for actual privacy rather than the performance of it. The host, a young woman named Zora, whose name tag had a small sketch of a hummingbird drawn beside her name, because apparently that was the kind of place this was, led Kale to a room at the back. Not a table in a back corner. An actual separate room. Small. 2 chairs facing each other across a single table. Candles. No other diners. No sound from the main room reaching this far. He sat. He set his tablet on the table edge. He looked at the candle, not the controlled flicker of electric imitation, but an actual flame responding to actual air, moving the way things moved when they were real. He watched it. He let himself just sit for a moment in the warmth of the room, in the specific quality of candle light, without converting it into anything. He was not nervous. That word didn't fit. He was aware. The way he was aware in the ER before a complicated procedure. Everything registered, nothing ignored, all of him present. Only this time the thing being tracked was not a patient's vitals or a dosage screen. It was himself, which was new. Which was, he understood exactly the point. Rhett arrived at 7:02. He came in without hurry. Dark jacket, no tie, the rolled cuff. He looked at the room first, as he always did, and then at Kale. And the way he looked was different this time. Not strategic. Not managing. Just looking. At Kale. In a room they had both chosen to be in, with no other agenda written on top of it. He sat. Zora appeared. Rhett thanked her by name. She left. The room settled around the two of them and the candle and the soft sound coming from somewhere beyond the walls. Rhett said, I don't usually know how to do this without turning it into a strategy. Kale looked at the candle. Looked back. Then don't. Rhett was quiet. He held those 2 words the way he had held the first Y in the Hargrove suite, full weight before anything else. Okay, he said. He set his menu aside. Folded his hands on the table. I grew up in a place where dinner was whatever was available, he said. Sometimes a lot, sometimes close to nothing. What I learned early was that the food itself was never the point. The point was who was sitting at the table with you. He held Kale's eyes. I'm telling you that because I want you to know why I eat in rooms like this one. Not for the expense of it. For the fact that a room like this says, the person across from me is the only thing on the agenda tonight. Kale held that. He typed slowly. Nobody has said that to me. In those exact words. I know. Rhett's voice was even. I've watched how people interact with you in that building. I know the difference between how someone is treated when their communication is visible versus how you're treated when you can't be loud. I know what it looks like when a person builds a whole architecture of precision around themselves because the institution didn't build one for them. You see more than you say. I try to. He paused. But not always. I should have moved faster. Kale looked at him. He typed, You moved when you had enough. You gave me enough the first day. Rhett looked at the candle briefly. I should have found you sooner. Kale sat with that. He picked up his coffee. They had ordered coffee while they waited. It had arrived without fanfare and set it down again. The night in the ER, he typed, When you brought the coffee and left. I laughed after you were gone. Rhett looked at him. I didn't know you were still in the building. I'd gone back from the parking structure. My phone. He held Kale's gaze. I saw through the window. You looked surprised by it, the laughing. Like you'd forgotten it was something you did. I had, Kale typed. That's the version of a person I trust, Rhett said. The one that exists when they think no one is watching. The unedited version. The candle moved between them. Kale looked at his hands on the table. For the first time in longer than he could accurately place. Not just tonight, not just in this room, but in any room, in any building, with any person, he was not managing his hands. They were not performing stillness. They were not demonstrating composure. They were just there, open on the table. His hands in their actual state, not the managed version. He typed, I'm not good at this part. I know. I've been keeping everything organized for a long time. I know that too. I don't know what I look like when I stop. Rhett looked at the table. At the open hands. He said quietly, You look like that. Something moved through Kale. Not fast. Not dramatic. The way real things moved, like the slow turning of something that had been facing the wrong direction for a long time. Not all at once, but in the accumulation of small shifts you didn't notice until one morning the light looked different and you realized something had turned. Dinner came. They ate. Rhett talked about a winter when the heat went out on an unused floor of the office tower, and he had gone up there alone with a flashlight just to stand in the still cold air and feel what a building felt like when it wasn't performing for anyone. Kale typed about a patient from 2 years ago, a woman in her 80s who had held his hand through a difficult week and on the last day, the day she was leaving, had signed to him. Slowly, imperfectly, clearly having learned this one specific motion for this one specific moment. Thank you. Not typed. Signed. In Kale's language. For Kale. Rhett was quiet after that. She learned it for you, he said. Yes. That's the thing about being seen correctly, he said. Once someone does it, you know the difference. You feel it in comparison to everything else. They sat with that for a moment. The candle between them. The room quiet. After the plates were cleared and the small room had settled into its final stillness, Rhett reached into his jacket. He set a single folded page on the table. There's something I want to tell you, he said. I want to be clear that tonight is not about this. But it belongs to you and I don't want to hold it past this evening. Kale looked at the page. You have been performing patient advocacy work at a scope that exceeds your nursing classification for at least 2 years, Rhett said. Catching errors. Documenting systemic patterns. Protecting people the institution failed to protect on its own. The board has created a formal position that matches the work you've actually been doing. He nodded at the page. Patient Advocacy Lead. New title. New compensation. Created by the board. Reviewed and voted on properly. I made sure it didn't come from me directly. I wanted it to be yours on its own terms. Not a gift. A correction. Kale looked at the page for a moment. You said this wasn't business. It isn't, Rhett said. But it's also true. Both things are true. Kale reached across and picked up the page. Unfolded it. Read it completely, every line, every clause, the salary figure, the effective date, the board signatures at the bottom. Patient Advocacy Lead. His name. Signed. Official. He set it down beside the candle. Looked at the warm light moving across it. He looked at Rhett. I don't know what comes after this. Neither do I, Rhett said. Exactly. He held Kale's gaze. But I'd like to find out. Simply. No decoration. Kale looked at the screen. Those words. He looked at the candle. He looked at the man across the table, who had asked permission before touching his wrist, who had brought $4 coffee on a Tuesday night, who had sat on a listing stool without complaint, who had built an entire evening around proving that the person across from him was the only thing on the agenda and had not once broken from that. Kale reached across the table. Not for the paper. Not for a handshake. He rested his forehead against Rhett's. 1 second. Maybe 2. No declaration. No performance. No grand statement for an audience that wasn't there. Just 2 people in a quiet room leaning toward each other after a long time of being separately exhausted by the weight of things carried alone. Finding the language that didn't require words or screens or signs. The one that just said, here. Still here. This. Rhett exhaled. Slow and full. The release of something long held. Kale sat back. He looked at the appointment letter. at the candle still moving, at his hands on the table, open, unguarded, in their actual state. Outside the single high window of the private room, rain had begun. Not hard, not urgent, the kind that arrived without announcement and fell soft against everything equally. The green door and the lamp above it and the side street and the wide city beyond, pressed against the glass. But it sounded nothing like that first night. Nothing like weight. Nothing like something trying to push through what wouldn't open. It sounded like the world settling. Like something that had been held under pressure for a long time had finally been allowed to just rest. Cale listened to it. He typed one final thing and turned the screen toward Rhett. It sounds different now. Rhett looked at the words. Cale. At the candle still moving in the warm small room. Yeah, he said simply. It does. The rain kept falling. Soft and unhurried. Against the glass of a side street restaurant where two people sat with the remains of a dinner that had been exactly what it said it was. No strategy, no agenda, just the two of them, and one candle still moving, and a folded page with a name on it that finally matched the work it belonged to. The rain pressed against the glass, and this time it sounded like applause. If the story moved something in you, share it with someone who needs it today. If you've ever been the person in the room that everyone looked away from, the one who kept doing the work, kept catching the errors, kept holding everything together while nobody named what you were carrying, drop your story in the comments. You are not invisible here. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story on this channel. We tell stories about real courage, about the quiet kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, about staying, about being seen. We'll see you in the next one.